I know.
All right, it's a little after 6. Let's go ahead and get started. Can I get a roll call of the members, please?
Andy Bailey,
Here.
Grant Muller,
Here.
Stacy Pettigo,
Here.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Here.
Chester Bankus,
Here.
staff members Liz Stitzel and Kat Bell are present, as well as Attorney Jay Moore.
Hope you guys have all got a chance to look at the minutes. I'd entertain a motion if there's any changes or corrections that need to be made, or to approve them as they're presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. We don't have any old business tonight. Let's dive right into our public hearings. Let's start with the first one, which is application number CC-2024-00279, docket number 17-24-SC. It's a petition for Nicholas Phoebus and Kesh Green. They're asking for a special exception. Can staff take us through the staff report, please?
Sure. So as you notice, this is a request for a special exception specifically for an accessory apartment and an accessory structure. Both this property and everything surrounding it are zoned agriculturally. The petition site actually consists of 3 parcels with a total of 24.9 acres that are being used together as a single building lot, even though there's 3 separate tax parcels, all in common ownership. They're between West 700 North and West 800 North on the west side of North 200 West in Section 32 of Owen Township. So this one's going to be a little confusing just because of the way the order goes here, but the accessory structure with the accessory apartment already exists. It was actually built as the house on the property, and it's small. And what's happened is, as the petitioner's family has grown, they now would like to build a larger home, but they would be required to tear down this building because there's a dwelling in it, unless they're able to get a special exception for the Board of Zoning Appeals authorizing them to keep this original unit as an accessory apartment and an accessory structure, and then they can build the home on the same property. The 3 parcels must remain together. They are subdivision exempt. There's substantial floodplain along this property. It's mostly on the north side, but it kind of bleeds down through a good chunk of this acreage. The petitioners did discuss building an addition on the existing structure, since they could have done that without having to come through the BZA, but decided they would rather have a new detached house and then keep this. There is a septic there that's installed to support an equivalent of a 4-bedroom dwelling, so as long as the new dwelling does not surpass a 3-bedroom home, there's sufficient septic to support the apartment and the new dwelling. On the second page, you'll kind of see how that floodplain just really takes the majority of that parcel right out of being useful for development. And then you've got a picture here from the road. You can see it's a long driveway, and everything's back down the end of that. So in terms of request analysis, there's a series of special exception findings that the board needs to find in order to approve a special exception. So first, the proposed use conforms to the district provisions in which it will be located and the general regulations of the ordinance. So there are 8 supplemental developmental standards for an accessory apartment. They're in Section 502. First, that there can only be one of them approved, and that's met. Second, that it be secondary and incidental. So the new dwelling will be a separate structure, and this existing accessory structure, the apartment, is right around 1,100 square foot, and that includes the garage in that 1,100. So the new house definitely looks like it's going to have more square footage and be larger than this, and it would be secondary to that. And Kat just kind of included, so you can see the floor plan of the house that they're in now that they're wanting to turn into an apartment. Third, that the apartment's either in a detached or an attached structure. So this is detached, and it does have a certificate of occupancy, so there's no issue with it as far as its safety to occupy. Next, that the owners have to reside in either the dwelling unit or the apartment. The owners currently reside in the apartment, but they would move into the new house once completed. That there be no exterior stairways to the apartment. There are none. The next standard has to do with the interior access, which doesn't apply in this case because it's an accessory structure. You have to conform with all applicable county building code and health department standards. In this case, the accessory apartment met residential code and has a certificate of occupancy. And as long as the new dwelling does not exceed 3 bedrooms, then there'll be no issue with the health department either. Finally, that the additional parking is sufficient. In this case, you need 2 spots per unit, so 4 parking spaces on 24 acres. I'd say there's plenty of space. The second one is that the proposed use shall not involve an element or cause a condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to another property or persons, and shall comply with the performance standards herein. So if this application is approved, then the petitioners would be permitted to move forward with their plan of building a house, and then transitioning into it and keeping the apartment. We've never received any complaints about the unit that they're in now, nor are they expected, as typically residential uses do not create things that are considered to be dangerous, injurious, or noxious. 3, the proposed use shall be sited, oriented, and landscaped so that the relationship of its buildings and grounds to adjacent buildings and properties do not impair health, safety, or comfort, nor adversely affect values of adjacent properties. So the accessory apartment will remain as it is located, and it is residential in appearance. There doesn't seem to be any issue with this finding. 4, the proposed use shall produce a total environmental effect consistent with and not harmful to the environment of the neighborhood. So the accessory apartment already exists and is not easily seen from the road. The existing structure can pretty much only be seen from the farm ground around it. Once the new dwelling is built, the apartment will appear to just look like a detached accessory structure. 5, the proposed use shall organize vehicular access and parking to minimize conflicting traffic movement on adjacent streets. This finding appears to be met. There's plenty of room for parking. Finally, the proposed use shall promote the objectives of the ordinance and be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So the 2012 Comprehensive Plan Land Use Goal 2 says to promote the development of residential areas with high-quality housing in a variety of types, styles, and densities. The petition site is an owned township in an area that's designated for agricultural use. Although the site is designed for agricultural use, the accessory apartment exists because a single-family dwelling was already determined to be approved by special exception approval in 2018, and then it's more than 20 acres, so it's subdivision exempt. The 2018 approval was actually for 2 dwellings, but the minor subdivision was never completed, so there can only be 1 here. And we already talked about how they ended up building that apartment first, so they're just wanting to expand and put that dwelling in. So consequently, having been through the findings, staff would recommend the approval of the special exception request to allow the accessory apartment and the accessory structure to remain, and then they can build the existing home, and this would remain as accessory.
Thank you, Liz. If anybody wants to speak, please go to the podium and speak. Does the petitioner have anything to add to the staff report?
No.
Okay. Does anybody else want to speak on this case? Well, okay.
I don't,
Any
I
more
don't see,
discussion?
no, I don't see it.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion.
I'd be glad to make a motion to approve application number CC 2024-00279, docket 1724 SE, according to findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference. I guess with the conditions that are listed in the staff report.
And I'll second that.
So Chester moved and Grant seconded. I'll take a roll call vote when you get a chance.
All right, Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
and Chester Bankus.
Yes.
Motion
Right.
passes.
5-0. So you should be able to start working with the office on the permitting for the house.
And you're free to go. You don't have to stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Let's start with the second on the agenda here. It's application number CC 2024-00310, docket number 18-24-VA. It's a petition of Gettingsville Telephone Company, and they're asking for a variance. Liz, can you take us through the staff report, please?
Yeah, as you noted, this is the petition of Gettingsville Telephone Company. The request is a setback variance to construct a 60 by 64-foot structure for storing equipment at 36 foot from the road right-of-way of north 200 east instead of the required 50. This property is zoned rural residential, as is the land to the north, east, and south. There's agricultural ground across the street to the west. The site is located on a 1.4 acre parcel, and then there's, another parcel kind of in common ownership adjacent there on the east side of north 200 east, and there's an existing small accessory structure on it. The site serves the Gettingsville Telephone Company. There's an office to the south, and then this is kind of a storage building, and they're wanting to build another accessory storage building at 36 foot from the edge of 200 east. It's right away. That storage building will be used for storing equipment that's currently being stored outdoors. The property immediately adjacent to the north is the Gettingsville Cemetery, just to give you a frame of reference, and there's agricultural fields owned by the same petitioner immediately behind adjacent, and then behind that additional fields owned by others. So there on the second page you can see a map there that shows you the parcel in question, and Kat's kind of indicated kind of where the front of that structure would sit, and then the parcel to the south has the office building, and the parcel behind is additional land owned by the petitioner as well. The second is a picture that kind of shows you there's a gravel parking area there where some of the equipment that would ultimately go in the building is being stored right now, and then just kind of grass lawn and farm field. So final picture then the next page just shows you a different view with the accessory structure that sits there to the back. In terms of request analysis, there's 3 findings that must exist in order to grant a variance, and we go through those in order. So first, the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the community. So it doesn't look like there's an injurious condition. Immediately here, the building is not likely to obstruct traffic's view in this proposed location. And obviously the equipment would move into the building, which is a positive. 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So the proposed storage building would not appear to affect the adjacent area substantially adversely, since it will be pole barn style and the area is a combination of agricultural and rural residential, and of course a graveyard to the north. And finally, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will produce practical difficulties in the use of the property. And this is the finding that we struggled with, and I think the petitioner is here to present their viewpoint. We definitely don't have agreement between petitioner and staff. But on the staff side, we struggled with the definition of practical difficulty. So the building's needed to store equipment out of the weather where it's safe for theft or vandalism. And the petitioner stated that they're asking for this because they have limited space on the site. And with the location of the existing building, he thinks it would create a practical difficulty having to maneuver vehicles into a new structure if he didn't sit at 36 foot from the road. And so moving back creates a practical difficulty, and that he wouldn't be able to use the building at all. So that said, the staff reviewed it, and we struggled with the practical difficulty because we measured it, there's an acre of ground to the north, and then additionally they have the farm field to the back. It looked like there was plenty of space to fit a pole building in while meeting all the standards. We didn't find any floodplain or ponds or cliffs or topography that can't be changed. And the septic does not appear to obstruct that northern area. So we struggled with practical difficulties aren't something that's just financial or slightly inconvenient. It's supposed to be something an applicant is struggling to find a way to work with at all. So it appeared to staff that moving the building closer to the existing one might be easier to align stuff, or we talked to the applicant, and I'll update you, moving it a little bit further north and extending, a little bit of the gravel to be able to get up to it might be an option as well. But certainly that's the finding that the board will need to kind of discuss tonight, and the petitioner definitely very respectfully has a different point of view on that. So if the board feels that there's a practical difficulty there, then you'll just need to make sure that you re-specify this finding to make it clear what the practical difficulty is and then lead to your finding. So based on the struggle with the practical difficulty, staff recommends to deny the variance for that 14 feet. Now, I want to update you, because we did have a conversation with the petitioner who sent an email, and I forwarded the pictures to the board because I wanted to make sure that if he referenced those, you would already have them. So they kind of sent me a map showing where they'd really like to place this, and then indicating the two different distances, and then some pictures to kind of show how things relate. And certainly, as a person, I can understand like their perspective on it, and I want to be fair in representing that we did have some conversations, and I let them know that staff reports are not binding documents, they're just advisory documents, and they should certainly present their viewpoint and how they see it as a practical difficulty so that the board can consider that and then make a decision. So I wanted to make sure I presented that kind of in full to you and let you know. I think that sums up the staff report where we said, I will note, there are a couple buildings to the south that do sit closer to the road. They're not within. There's a distance, so within 330 foot, you can take the average of all buildings. And if the average is less than the required 50 foot, then you don't have to come for a variance. But this barn that's existing is way far back. And then you have these two to the south. And the second one to the south is not within like the required distance. So you've got an average of two where one is way far back and one is, for a little bit further forward. So, staff doesn't feel like there's a danger here, like nobody's going to hit a building. I wanted to be clear about that. But I'll let the petitioner present their viewpoint. But that was our struggle, is just figuring out why it was impossible to comply.
Okay. Would the petitioner like to share? If they would, please come up to the podium, please.
Yeah, I'm Steve Scott, and I'm the CEO, General Manager at Gettingsville Telephone.
And I'm Brandon Boinder, Superintendent Manager at Gettingsville.
And also in attendance is Ken Colby, our president, and Marna Huffer, our CSR. So I know you have some photos, but I have some additional photos that I don't think, Liz, I got those to Liz. Would you guys be interested in looking at them? I don't think I have enough for everybody, but.
Well, we can share them. So.
Okay, well, I didn't want you guys really to share, but.
When you guys look at them, if you can pass them down, we have to keep those for the record.
Okay, no, you can have them.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's just the way it works.
No, you're fine. Well, you're going to get some anyway, Liz. There you go.
Thank you.
There you go, sir. Thank you. But anyway, Brandon's going to discuss our findings and hopefully sway you into changing your mind. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely believe our variance request is to improve our site in a practical manner, not inhibit it or have difficulty or practical difficulty. The first thing I'd like to do is point out what we believe are some inaccuracies that are actually in the staff report. Does everybody have a staff report, I'm assuming? Okay. So if you go to page number 2, this building where I think it was Kat that actually did this, I think is what Liz represented. She represents that this is the front of the building, but I want to make sure we point out that that is not the actual size of the building. If you reference picture 1, if you look at picture 1, we actually put a true representation of that building size, a 64 by 60. I know that picture is not supposed to be representative, but we want to also point out that the existing easement, if you look at the bottom line, that's where the existing easement is, and then you'll see where the variance request is. So we are requesting 14 feet. When Kat was out there, or the representative from the area plan, we had come up with 12 feet when we were doing the math in our head. Well, since then, we've looked at it, and really we only need about 8 feet. When we came up with 12, I remember having the conversation with Kat that we would just request 14, just in case there was some sort of oddity or something that we're not thinking of when it comes to like the building overhang, since we don't really know the rules, so that's why we requested 14 feet. So we believe that, even though it's not maybe supposed to be, we believe that that is not an accurate picture, when you look at the staff report.
It was advertised with the application of the 60 by 64. The petitioner did not submit a site plan, but they did send the pictures, which I forwarded to the board with the picture there. But that was the first site plan that we received.
The other inaccuracy that we believe is on page 3 towards the very bottom. This is a representation of what my boss, Steve, had with the conversation with Kat, and it says that it stated that we were asking due to limited space on the site of the location of the existing building, and he thinks it would create a practical difficulty to maneuver vehicles into the new structure. So what he's referring to is the idea that if we built the 60 by 64 with the existing structure that's actually there, it would actually be positioned, part of it would be positioned behind that building. Like the building would not be fully exposed. That's what he was representing when he was discussing this with Kat. So if you look at picture 3, if you look at picture 3, you'll see a stake on there, and that's how far back that building would actually sit on the existing structure. So we just don't think it's a fair, we just don't think it's a practical, we think this is a practical difficulty to actually build a building behind another building. The third thing in the report that we wanted to point it out is towards this, on page 3, towards this bottom, it says grass area. It says, this talks about maneuvering vehicles inside of the parking lot that we have. And at the time, or if you look at the pictures that are on here, if you look at page 2, if you look at page 2 at the top, where we talked about the building earlier, you'll see the grass area. And this is what this was referencing in the staff report, is about maneuvering vehicles through the grass area. So why would you want to put your building this way where you have to back stuff in, you'd actually be going through the grass area? Well, when the representative was out there, if you look at the bottom of this page, you'll notice that it's all gravel, that there is no grass area.
The grass is in the center of the driveways. You know how you back a semi-truck, you pull forward and then you back up, so your nose would be,
Yeah, so that grass area used
but
to
the grass
be-
area we were referring to is the grass in the center of the circle,
Correct.
whether your truck would be facing
Yes.
south which way, not the grass where the gravel is.
Yes, you're talking about this grass right here.
I can't see that from here, sorry.
Just
And I apologize.
referring to this right here.
Yeah, make sure we're looking at the same thing. Yeah, in the center, not the gravel area that sits up
Yeah,
here.
so if you look, exactly what Liz is saying, in this center area right here, if you look at this picture that was taken, you'll see that it's all gravel now, right? So that grass area does not exist.
You can pull up the semi to back straight.
Yeah.
Yep. So we believe those are some inaccuracies that are actually in the statement, or some inaccuracies that maybe get portrayed in a different way when we actually look at it as being, a practical manner. The couple other things that we got is on this page here where it shows our property that we have. If you look at where it says the office right here, which represents our office, that farm ground to the east of there, that's actually ours. It's a 3-acre agricultural plot. The farmer that currently farms that, he actually accesses that through the adjacent agricultural property south, which is Joe Avery's. So if that farmer was to retire, somebody else was to do that, he may not have full access, so he'd have to actually use the northern portion of that lot where we want to put our pole building. So that is
Up against the cemetery.
up against the cemetery. Yep. One thing that the area plan representative was possibly turning the building, not making it like perfectly east and west or whatever, and actually trying to turn it, so then you're trying to back vehicle, like you're trying to pull in there and back vehicles in. So we don't like that idea, because that way you can just kind of pull in. Cosmetically, it looks good, and you can pull into that grass area, pull straight back in. The other thing that we wanted to point out is on pictures 5 and 4, it represents a culvert. And what this is on this page 2, right about where this tree is where that culvert is. On page 2, about where the lot actually is, there's a culvert right here, and that's what that picture represents. So if you look to the east of there, up, and I got on Google Earth today, there is about 20, 30 foot of elevation difference where that water comes off that hill into that culvert. So we don't believe like turning the building or trying to push the building back, it would actually inhibit maybe some water flow when it rains. So we believe that trying to push that back or try to go that way would actually be an issue when it comes to the water flow and the rain, and possibly some issues with the culvert. And finally, the thing that we have talked about is when we build the building, we have this existing structure, and then we're gonna build this pole building. What we talked about is putting a space in there to where we can actually put a gate where we can get a piece of equipment in there, and then we're gonna fence in a chain link fence, which wouldn't block water flow, and fence in the area to where we could actually use that for storage for our fiber optic cable, anything, so we have a yard that would store outdoor equipment or whatever. That way we can actually fence that in. They also mentioned, if you look at page 2, where we have this existing barn right here, and then we have this is our existing barn, here's an existing structure. So they talked about trying to maneuver like the farm equipment through that little area there to access this field. So what's gonna happen is contractors like Electricom, for example, as you see representative here, they'll be parking equipment over there. There's a utility pole there. So it just doesn't make much sense to be able to try to move farm machinery in between an area where it's gonna be highly congested possibly. Anything else, boss man, or?
I will note, if you're gonna keep dropping gravel, at some point you're gonna need an impervious surface variance, because you can't have more than a certain amount covered. It didn't come up, we'd have made you aware of that if we know we're talking about graveling the whole lot.
Yep.
And the drainage board will get concerned about blocking the flow of water. I mean, it's one thing, like we talked about, if you move the building north or you move the building east, like into that other acreage. But if every bit of it ends up covered, I don't remember the impervious surface for R1. I want to say it's like 20%. It's,
Okay.
I mean, I'm not so sure that you're not, now that we know that you've gravelled that you're not already out of, over what you were in 93. But certainly if you keep graveling, it's,
Well, that's a great point. We don't want to add any more gravel. We want to keep as much green space as we can, I mean,
well, he just said to understand you were going to fence and gravel everything
No.
to the north so you could store
Fence.
reels.
It won't be gravel.
just keep people out of it.
Alright, let's not get in a pissing match.
So with that, we thank you for your time. Those are our concerns, and go from there.
Thank you.
Does anybody have anything else to add to this case? Well, state your name and, oh, you're just moving up.
No, now you got to talk. You can't just move.
Anybody? We'll go to, board discussion. I mean, I think the drainage case on, picture number 4 presents a problem. If they have to move that building to the east, they're gonna get into trouble on the gravel side. And we could easily obstruct the natural flow of drainage off that culvert. I think that's where I feel the practical difficulty is. I mean, obviously they have enough land there, but do we want to go down the road of going in front of the drainage board when we have a drainage problem here, or we have impervial surface problems
Yeah,
for 14 feet?
yeah.
When you've got an office building that sits 30 feet probably off the easement, does anybody know exactly how close the office
I
is?
can measure it. If you give me a minute.
I can tell you by looking at where our stakes are, it's about dead even with our building. And the guy in front, the next guy to the south, he is closer.
I don't understand why they pull this way back,
Looks to me like they're good north.
this direction.
she's worried about more gravel. We're gonna, like where that building's gonna go, we plan on, that's why that gravel's there, we plan on putting concrete in there anyway. It's a little worse.
So if the gravel keeps being added, then they might need to put a retention pond in or something
Well,
like that.
so there's two different things that'll be in play. First off, this hasn't been to drainage board yet, so like, it hasn't been for a tile waiver. So Dan may have other concerns that come into play that we don't know about yet. We typically send these for tile waivers when they apply for the permit. And if the drainage board gives it one, then great. But if they go, whoa, we need to look at this, then they do that before they get their permitting. So that part of it, I can't speak to, but the zoning part of it, it says, based on zoning district, only so much of the ground can be covered by gravel, pavement, rooftops. Weirdly enough, swimming pools, like you wouldn't think, but it's not impervious, you can't go through the bottom of it. So basically, if it's not vegetation or dirt, how much can you cover? Residential and agricultural districts have much lower percentages. Your industrial and business districts are a little closer to 50%. And then when you get into downtown business districts, like this square, those are the only places where you can cover pretty much 100% because they're all zoned in historic areas where the ground's already all covered. So it's just a different environment in terms of building. And then when someone applies for an impervious surface area variance, we always do lean hard on the surveyor because ultimately that's what we're concerned about protecting, is not creating another like east side drainage problem. For those who remember what that used to be like in Frankfurt, it was entirely a man-made problem. So the idea is you want to make sure the water stays on each site. And yeah, if you're covering more, then the surveyor has to prescribe how you're going to offset that so you don't create an issue for neighbors.
So does that follow the parcel, the tax parcel size, or does that follow I mean, we just had a previous case where we hooked, 3 different parcels together to make some things work.
So it's going to be the building lot. So we would include what's on the lot to the south. We would also include what's, so you calculate it all together. And I haven't calculated this one because we didn't, that was kind of a new conversation. It was filling some of that in. And I haven't been out to this site probably since I was zoning administrator.
And I think he would also they would be able to use the ground behind
Yes.
in their
It's all one
calculation
building lot.
too.
But I want to say that rural residential and ag, non-farm ag, they're really low numbers, like maybe 15 or 20. They're not a big,
Yeah.
so it doesn't take very long to get there if you don't have a lot of land. I just haven't calculated this one, so I can't. I just wanted to make sure in conversation that nobody could say later on, now why are you denying the permit over that? You didn't tell us that. When I hear something that's out of line with what I know, I try to make sure people know, hey, like this might change your course, so they don't feel like I could have warned them, down the road.
The photograph that has the wrong size building on it, what is that size of the building that's pictured?
We don't have a way to scale in there, so what happened, I'll let Kat speak for herself, but my understanding of what happened is they did not submit a site plan.
Okay.
So Kat needed to represent something for you guys. There is no way on Beacon to measure when you draw. Unfortunately, I hate that because it drives me batty all the time. So you have to just roughly approximate. She did note in the staff report that it was a 60 by 64. But we didn't receive a site plan until after the staff report was sent to them and they sent us this. Up until then, that was the best we could do with the tools we had to try to represent, that drawing. But it was not intended to be a legal survey or, anything like that. And my guess is Kat was most concerned about showing it setback from the road.
That's right. Can you tell me what the dimensions of the parcel are?
Yes. Do you want the whole building lot or just the parcel here?
I'd say the whole parcel, we can kind of estimate.
In my understanding, where are they gonna go?
When they first inquired about the building
essentially the
permit,
same.
I
That's what I
informed them then, they were wanting to know what their setbacks would need to be.
They're trying to do
And so
this
that's
with-
whenever I looked on the county,
Yeah.
map,
Yeah, I
road
don't
map,
really see any
to
issue
find
with
out what
that.
the right of way is in addition to the
Especially at the
50-foot
biggest- that was
setback
my
that they were
biggest thing
required
too,
to
right?
meet. And Steve called me back and said that,
'Cause if you
he
keep
wasn't
going
gonna be
back
able
more.
to meet that they were gonna come up short. So then I went out and met him out there and measured, and And,
Okay.
That's how we
So-
come to conclusion that they were gonna have to file for a
They've got
variance.
181 foot north of the northern drive. The total road frontage is 385 foot. The total depth is 481 foot. And then when you move to the back, because that field is actually longer than the frontage, up on the front, you're right around 500 foot maybe in length in that back field. It's just a little bit, I don't want to say L-shaped because it's a weird L, but kind of. And if you're just talking about that grass area, you've got 181 foot by 220 foot roughly of grass north of the northern drive.
North of it.
North of the northern drive. I was just a little unclear as to which measurement you wanted, so I
That's
took all of them.
Yeah. So 200 feet north of the northern drive and a 64 by 60 still leaves 140 feet to the north or something like that. You said
120 foot to the north beyond the building, yes.
Okay, still 120 feet.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, I'll make a motion.
I listened to it.
All right. I'll move to approve, the application CC 2024-00310, docket number 18-24-VA, going against the staff report because of, practical difficulties, due to drainage from the culvert along the road.
So you'd be following findings 1 and 2 in the staff report?
Yes.
And you're changing finding 3 to, due to, you find there's a practical difficulty due to drainage?
Yep.
And I'll second.
But what we're really talking about here is we could move the building back, right, in line with the other building.
But then we get into the problem with the drainage, because now we're moving right into the front of that where that culvert is. You see what I'm saying?
But that's plenty of space between there and the road, and that culvert.
Yeah.
That's a lot of room.
Right.
Not when you're moving a 3-inch rain when it's like we had the last couple of weeks. I'm sure that there's water running right into that building if we set it right there. That's what I'm concerned about. I mean, that site,
It doesn't appear to look like there's any waterways running through there from the satellite photo.
the deep ditch on the west side of that.
Picture number 5.
Because if you look at those pictures, you see the water.
Sorry, can you go to the microphone? Because we do have people that watch online. I don't know, we can hear you great, but they won't be able to.
If you would look at that picture that we gave you, I think it's 5. There is a slope there, and all the water comes from that back field, goes down that way. Everything from the cemetery comes that way, and then we have another waterway or a drain or a way that water exits to that culvert right down there. So there's 3 different ways that water has to get out of there, and it goes to that culvert right down there at the end. And so if we move that barn back, there'll be water in it. I mean, we're going to have to raise the barn if that's what's going to have to happen.
What was your name?
Oh, Marna Heffer.
Sorry,
Yes, I understand.
my bad. I should have asked.
No, you're fine.
I need to see that.
So is picture 5 looking to the,
Setting from the road, I'm
It's set
assuming.
from the road.
So it's
Almost on
looking-
top of where that culvert's
Yeah.
going across,
so
correct?
it's looking to the west,
Yeah.
or to the east?
To the east, yes.
To the east, yes, to the east, okay.
Then there is a slope. It's,
There is a slope, it's all
It's hilly
over.
right
I
there.
don't see it, I guess I don't see a whole lot of difference in the slope from,
it's hilly out there.
yeah. I see it past the lot. I'm not sure I see it in the lot.
Do you guys agree with that water movement like that she just described?
To be honest, without the drainage board weighing in, I don't have enough knowledge to tell you. I haven't personally been up and stood on the site to know if if that actually flows in and around, or if you could raise the barn, it would flow under, if an underground culvert could be put in. I mean, there's just a lot of things. I don't know if the drainage board will require a retention pond, which then would completely change I mean, I just don't have enough knowledge to answer that.
No, that's okay.
I do agree it might not be, but I also would say it could well be. I mean, I don't have enough information. The only thing I could recommend there is you could continue and ask them to go to the drainage board
Yeah,
first and then
that's-
come back with more concrete information.
That's kind of what.
But I don't know enough to advise you on that, unfortunately. I'm not gonna pretend to know something I don't.
I just don't know why we would issue a variance for something if we don't need it, you know?
Well, I mean, here's my thought on why we issue the variance, and you know, I think drainage is the big factor there for me. I mean, if you push that barn to the north, you run into that drainage issue. You cause more gravel. You take away more green space at the end of the day. Those are I guess are my reasons for making my motion,
You would add more gravel.
because you're going to have to extend that gravel at least, I would say 50 feet by 40 feet, so you're putting in another 2,500 square foot of gravel, which plus, I understand exactly why they're doing it, is they want to square those buildings up and have access so that you could put, I don't know what the plan is, but I'm assuming that there'll be a 30-foot door or two 20s or three 20s on that facing that
12
south
by
side
10 and then an 18
and backing into something at a odd angle. So, I mean, if this was a farm lot, that's how I would set it up.
Because I don't know if you.
How bad?
You can see the lot. You can pull a semi in there and you can back it straight up. If that's, where we have the barn planned, you can back it straight in instead of going at an angle or anything, so.
For those listening online, she stated that where the barn is, where they want to put it, they think they'll be able to back the truck straight in. Did I sum that up?
Yep. You did.
Okay, all right.
Because either way, whether we approve the variance request tonight, it's still got to go in front of drainage board.
Or at least to the surveyor for approval. I mean, I don't want to say it has to go in
Well,
front of
yeah,
because
yeah.
the surveyor's office will determine that based on their rules of drainage, and
Yeah.
I guess I don't.
I
feel
sometimes
like
get surprised,
I
so.
don't feel like it makes sense for us to issue a variance if that hasn't occurred, because we're all doubting it. None of us are certain here as to what's going on.
Oh, I'm 100% certain when I made the motion. I mean, I sat there, I drove by there and I sat right on the top of the culvert and looked at where they parked their buildings, and when it was said in the staff report about moving it to the east, I don't want to do that. To move it to the east, probably a good 20 feet, and then move it back to the north there to make that happen.
And you don't believe that moving it to the north would be a good option?
Well, you're running into drainage. Yeah, the culvert's, what, 25 feet to the north?
Then it makes it more difficult for them with their equipment too. Because backing at an angle is not fun.
I understand that part.
I'm not sure how we'd know that, though, all that drainage, if we haven't had it surveyed. That's just secondhand speculation there.
If the culvert's 25 feet to the north, it's already running through the barn the way it's proposed.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was looking at too. I'm like, well, how's the water just missing the barn to begin with?
I note, in case it helps you guys, that Andy made a motion. I haven't heard a second.
I seconded it.
But, I mean, you guys can go ahead if you want and
There was a second.
vote and see where it lies, or you can, I mean, I don't want to cut your discussion short, but I also,
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah.
don't want you guys to feel like you have to convince each other if you can see if it works or not, I guess is what I'm saying.
I say that we call a roll call vote, please, Liz.
All right, Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Moeller,
Yes.
Stacy Pittigo,
Yes.
Scott Husensberger,
No.
Chester Benkus.
No.
Okay, so you're approved 3-0.
3-2.
3-2. I'm sorry, guys, I just eliminated you. There's no, I can't do math apparently at this point. You're approved 3-2, so you'll need to work with us to start on that permitting process.
Thank you very much.
You guys are welcome to stick around or take off.
Get my eyes on the
I don't actually know where that,
Liz, do you have these?
I do have a copy of those, so you guys can, I guess, hang them on your walls.
All right. The next case is application CC dash 2024-00323, docket number 19-24-SC. It's the petition of Garrett Kimmel and Scott Kimmel. They're asking for a special exception. Can you take us through the staff report, please, Liz?
I can. So this is a request, as you noted, for a special exception. This is the one that's always familiar to us for single-family residents in the agricultural zoning district. So this particular site would be a 2-acre first split off a 121.78 acre parent tract on the east side of South 450 West, between West 300 South and West 400 South in Section 25 of Perry Township. The petitioners would like to build a single non-farm dwelling on the proposed new lot. This was run through the point system, but it only scored 8 points, mainly due to the proposed location of the new lot being on the southern edge next to the cemetery, and the point system doesn't recognize cemeteries as something like, that you account for. Had the owner placed this anywhere on the northern side of the lot up against Manson or the other house, it would have scored and we wouldn't be here. So it's the location, and they chose that location because it's up against the graveyard, so it doesn't create new maneuvering, and they feel like the northwest corner has a lot more drainage issues. But since even though the graveyard is an area of grass that you can't farm through, it's just not in the point system. So, had this been placed in the northwest corner, it would have gained 6 more points, which would have made it approved, if I did my math right, 14. I'm a little afraid of math at the moment after that last motion. Anyway, but in this location, it requires a special exception, and the applicant's seeking that. There's 4 criteria in section 513.03 of the Unified Development Ordinance that the board needs to affirmatively find are met. First, the lots shall be located such that proximity to other dwellings, the configuration of the parent tract, and the location of creeks, ditches, and other natural features have the least negative impact on the use of ag equipment or the use of the property as part of a farm. So this site is farm ground. It belongs to the petitioner, Garrett Kimmel's grandmother. Garrett is heavily involved with the farming practices on this site and on the remaining farm ground belonging to the family in the area. This proposed new lot will be just a small 2-acre area. They'd like to put it up against the cemetery, and it will be a dwelling for Garrett himself to reside in. The area around the petition site in this spot, they already have to farm around the cemetery, so this new lot wouldn't appear to cause any new maneuvering for farm equipment. There's a picture there at the top of the page. You can see how the cemetery sits there. There's some mature trees, and this lot would just stick right up against it. 2, locating a dwelling on the new lot would not interfere with current agricultural practices in the adjacent area, nor substantially restrict the expansion of confined feeding and other ag practices. So this location does not appear to have any large confined feeding operations within a mile that the new dwelling on the petition site would have any effect on. And with the proposed new lot being placed right off 450 West, it wouldn't appear to interfere with any other agricultural practices either. There are 10 to 11 horses to the south, but those only have a setback of 660 that's reciprocal, so this house would be well clear of that and not create any issues for the horse owner. There would need to be at least 50 horses to the south before you get a quarter-mile setback. So 4, there's mitigating circumstances in the application of the above rating criteria. So the primary mitigating circumstances, staff's understanding is this new home site is for the primary petitioner, Garrett Kimmel, who is also involved in farming on this farm ground. Also, in the other locations on the property where it scored enough to be administratively approved, there were pretty significant drainage issues and ponding that would make construction difficult and led the applicant to believe this proposed location next to the cemetery is better for drainage. In addition to those first standards, we have the normal special exception standards from section 513. There's 6 of those. 1, that the proposed use conforms to the district provisions in which it will be located and the general regulation of the ordinance. If a special exception is granted, 1 single-family home would be permitted on the property. This will require Plan Commission approval for a 1-lot minor subdivision, should it move past this board. 2, the proposed use shall not involve an element or cause a condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to other property or persons, and shall comply with the performance standards herein. The health department has received a soil test. Min specs confirm there is septic viability in this location. A perimeter drain outlet will be required. Houses in general don't typically create dangerous, injurious, or noxious situations. 3, the proposed use shall be sited, oriented, and landscaped so the relationship of its buildings and grounds to adjacent buildings and properties do not impair health, safety, or comfort, nor adversely affect values of adjacent properties. So this is mostly farm ground surrounding it. There's 3 existing homes in the vicinity, and then the unincorporated town of Manson as well. It would not appear property values will be adversely affected. 4, the proposed use shall produce a total environmental effect that consistent with and not harmful to the environment of the neighborhood. Again, there's already 3 existing residences and the unincorporated town of Manson, so there's a lot of residences already here. It would not appear another one is going to harm the neighborhood. 5, the proposed use shall organize vehicular access and parking to minimize conflicting traffic movement on adjacent streets. In 2 acres, there's plenty of room for 2 parking spaces off-street. Finally, the proposed use shall promote the objectives of the ordinance and be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So as we frequently discuss, Objective 2, Policy 1 from the 2012 Comprehensive Plan asks to minimize development on ag land. Perry Township's future land use plan designates this area as primarily agriculture. The proposed new lot is small. It's under that 2-acre max that we try to encourage to not chop up farm ground. It conforms to the comprehensive plan average density of no more than 1 home per 20 acres. It's going to be 1 per 120. We don't average Manson into that because it is zoned residentially, so it has a different density. Therefore, the new lot should not adversely affect the future plan of agricultural use. It is consistent with the objectives and densities in the comprehensive plan. Consequently, staff recommends to approve the request for a single home, noting minor subdivision approval will be necessary if approved by this board.
Does the petitioner have anything to add? Does anybody else want to speak upon this case before we go to board discussion? Okay. Seeing none. Board discussion.
Nothing, I don't see anything wrong with this.
Seems like a straightforward request, one that is allowed. And unless somebody has any concern, it seems like it's ready to approve.
I will make a motion to approve the application number CC-2024-00323, docket number 19-24-SE, according to findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference.
I'd be glad to second that.
Chester, did you second that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Moved and seconded, roll call vote. You get a chance.
Andy Bailey?
Yes.
Grant Moeller?
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo?
Yes.
Scott Hessensberger?
Yes.
Chester Bankus?
Yes.
Okay, so approved 5-0, so you'll be ready to find a surveyor to assist you, and you can talk to Kat if you need to know what requirements to start preparing a subdivision plat, but starting the process of dividing that land off will be your next step.
Thanks. You guys are free to go if you want to, or stick around, Scott.
Nice park next to it, or it should be parked.
All right, let's move on to the next application. This is application number CC 2024 00360, docket number 20-24 VA. It's a petition of Hardy Hills Solar Energy. They're asking for the approval of 10 variances. Can we talk about this one before we do the staff report a little bit? Just, I think there's enough variances here that we should take the staff report in, and then let's go through and make a motion for each one of these.
I set it up so
variances.
you could do it that way,
That-
or so you could put the ones you want to approve in one motion and then deal with the rest. But
Yeah.
yeah, I tried to break it out, and when I do the staff report, I'm gonna go through the initial, and then I'm gonna go through each variance one at a time, so hopefully you guys don't get lost trying to remember
Okay.
how the three findings lined up.
That's,
But this took me like 3.5 days to, like, it was hard to keep straight because there were so many, like, completely different
Yep.
isolated things. So, no,
let's just make it fluid and take it piece by piece.
and yeah,
how we
Kat
can-
was
how we
great.
can
She
do
gave
it.
me a humongous blank, so however you guys decide to make motions,
Okay,
we should be able to figure it out and crack it.
okay.
So,
Take us through the staff report, Liz.
all right, so as you noted, this is the petition of Hardy Hills Solar Energy. It's a request, there's 10 different variances that are filed with this, and they're kind of scattered throughout the solar overlay district. The parcels, all of the parcels these variances are on, as well as the surrounding ground, are all zoned agriculturally with the solar overlay on top of the parcels where the variances are. So, there's one variance request that involves UDO 406.02A, so that's the required setback between houses and panels. And then the other 9 all involve either buffer yards or residential screening modifications. With the exception of the setback one, a landowner of some sort has requested that Hardy Hills bring each of these forward. So that was how they got filed with us. There's a map that kind of summarizes those locations really generally there. We also sent that map out with the notices because we were trying, it's just confusing. We were trying really hard to help people that got that understand that it was just individual areas, not any broad sweeping brushes that change things everywhere for everybody. So we're gonna go through these, and I think I'm just gonna go through each one, talk about it, and then go through the findings, and then come back and do it again to try to help you guys stay straight. And if you want to pause after each one and make a decision, like, we can do that too, if you don't want to try to remember what variance 1 was, and then divide up public comment according to which variance they care about, like, you could do that too.
You want to do that?
Because you
Yeah,
might get to
let's-
10 and then completely forget what we set up
Yeah.
at 1.
Let's do that. Let's get through the first one and do our public
Okay,
comment.
and then if people here, some of them may only be here about one of these, they don't have to sit through all
and then
10
you
if
guys
they don't
can
want
get
to
out.
either.
So, if you
Okay,
want.
so let me start with variance 1. This particular variance is on land owned by the participating owner, which is the Waries, and then it was requested by a non-participating owner, Stacy Hickman, to the north. I've included a map for each of these. So in particular, they're asking for the shrubs in the screening to be reduced. So basically, they'd only have partial screening instead of full screening for their house. And Mrs. Hickman is requesting this because they have a horse pasture here with a rear pasture gate. They maintain this fence row, and the screening for the house will actually prevent them from being able to get access to the fence row. And so they would rather see some panels than not be able to maintain their horse pasture. They have submitted a letter to us stating that they, like, this isn't just on the word of Hardy Hills, they are actually requesting this. And the landowner, the Waries, are also supportive of this. So in terms of the findings, of course, we have our 3 variance findings. The first one is, in general, I'm just going to summarize, if I have to read this all I can, but that the approval is not injurious or harmful to safety, morals, general welfare. So this screening request only affects the house that's requesting removing it. The finding seems to be met. The house does not feel it's a negative effect on them. 2, that we're not negatively affecting adjacent values. Again, the house requesting it to be removed is the one that's affected, and they don't believe that this is going to affect them in an adverse manner. In fact, they think having the screening there is an adverse effect. And 3, the practical difficulty is if this row of shrubs were to remain, the neighbor who's actually pushing the request would be completely unable to get to their fence line or their rear gate to continue normal ag operations on the neighboring property, the way it's worked between these two owners in the past. So that finding appears to be met. So consequently, staff would recommend approving this variance request to eliminate the rows of shrubs, leaving only the row of evergreens and partial screening on the northern side of this set of arrays up against the Hickman residence as shown on the site plan.
Okay. Does anybody have anything to add on variance request number 1? Okay. Any board discussion here?
Seems fine to me from what they're asking.
Yeah.
What
And we
is
have,
being
we have
affected.
the letter on file.
Yeah.
And I did send all the letters to you
Yep.
guys as well, so you could
Yep.
personally verify each place I said we had consent that it was there.
Okay.
So are we gonna do this motion by variance?
Yeah, let's do it.
Variance number 1 right now.
Yeah.
So we can vote on variance number 1.
Yeah, but that's the only variance you're discussing.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice for me
Yep.
to keep it nice and clean and,
Yep,
I would
let's
agree.
do that.
okay. I'll make a motion to approve variance number 1 of application CC 2024-00360 BZ, docket number BZA 2024 BA. Variance number 1.
I'll second.
Chester moved and Grant seconded. Roll call vote.
was
when
Grant,
you're ready.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Grant
Grant.
did.
All right, Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
Chester Benkus.
Yes.
Okay. Just give me a moment. I'm making extra notes on this one just to make sure that when we're done,
Okay.
Kat and I are all good too.
Grant's taking a small recess.
Nope, no problem. We'll just wait a moment. I don't blame him. All right, so variance number 2, this is also on land that is owned by the participating landowners, the Waries, but this is on the opposite side of the road from the last one and just a little bit south. So the owner of this land, the Waries, have requested that the applicant, Hardy Hills, remove the section of screening that's indicated there on the site plan that's on the south side of the barn from the requirements. The landowner, meaning the Waries, have submitted a letter of support for the request. This particular screening is actually not for the benefit of the Waries, but for the benefit of the homes across the street. And Kayla McWirt, who lives directly across the street, did call the Plan Commission to inform us that if this screening is removed, then she's going to be able to see the solar panels across the road, as there will be a meaningful gap there as it grows up. She feels that there's plenty of room for farm equipment to exit, and she also feels like they could solve the problem alternatively by just rearranging the screening and moving the east-west row just a bit further to the south, and lengthening and shortening the north-south rows so that there's enough room for equipment to get in and out. So she wanted staff to know that she did not support the variance request. She feels it does affect her negatively. So moving to the 3 findings. First, that the approval will not be injurious to health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the community. So the affected neighbor across the street does feel that this would have a detrimental effect on her property and her welfare. So staff felt this finding didn't appear to be met in this case. Finding 2 about use and value of the area adjacent being affected adversely. Again, because there was not support from the neighbor across the street, it seemed like this finding might be difficult to argue. given that the purpose of the screening is solely to mitigate for neighboring property owners. And then finally, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulty. So the participating landowner is already receiving lease payments for the field the barn sits in. There doesn't appear to be any reason the landscaping couldn't be redesigned to go further south. In fact, I talked to Invenergy about that, and they felt it could be done, in order to rearrange that. It wasn't an issue with them. So consequently, that finding didn't seem to be met either. So following through on that, staff recommends to deny this variance request because it doesn't appear to clearly meet the findings. And with that, staff would recommend that the problem be solved by reconfiguring the landscaping alignment to allow for whatever room the Waries need in order to get it out of their barn, while not compromising the screening that the house across the street is receiving to protect their value as, over the next 50 years, going forward. So that's where I landed with that one.
Thank you, Liz. Does anybody have anything to say?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Matt Muller from Invenergy. Just wanted to agree with Liz, and we've spoken to the Waries, and I think they also understand the solution of moving this row south, which would be a development plan change. So I think we're in agreement with the staff finding here on this variance request.
Go ahead.
So,
We have another
Wait,
person
wait.
coming
got
up.
somebody else? Good.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm Kayla. My husband and I live right across the street. So we're kind of the ones against it. I wouldn't say that we're against it, but we just really want to make sure that we're being protected at our home and that there is a change. I just don't know exactly like a magic number on how far to move it. So we were kind of looking at, like, we measured from across the street, and the barn looks about to be about 42-ish feet. And then there's about 59 already feet of grassy area, so we would like to propose like maybe 15 additional feet. That would put them less than 10 feet of doubling the barn size, so no equipment that they're backing up should be over that manner. And then also with the placement of our mailbox and the row of trees already, there's already going to be a weird maneuver from the north-south, so we were wanting to suggest like a 15-foot movement to the south.
So I'd advise you to talk with Invenergy and the Waries about that exact arrangement. If the board denies the variance, then they can't remove screening. All they can do is rearrange it.
Okay.
So that'll actually then go for final discussion to the Plan Commission. They're gonna have to take everything they get variances for here, which will be material changes, plus other changes that have been non-material, and they have to take those all to the Plan Commission for a final approval of those amendments. So that's the place where if you're not okay with however that's been amended, like definitely, like have that discussion. The Plan Commission could say, all right, we need to adjust it. But I know in my conversations with like both parties, I think everybody wants to help you
we
find
tried
a solution.
to talk like ahead
So
of time too.
I would just try to work that out so that whatever ends up on that development plan works for everybody, and nobody has to make a decision about whose interests get served.
Yeah.
So.
Any other discussion? Turn to board discussion. I mean, looks like we can deny this variance. Looks like the parties are
Yeah,
gonna
that's what I would.
work together, and then it goes back to area plan when all these changes get made, so.
So is it just a simple denial and that's all that's needed?
You could, or you say you didn't deny it because it doesn't meet the findings, like,
Do we need to include the recommendation?
You could say-
At all?
I mean, it's per the findings in the staff report if you're following the same logic.
Okay.
So, yeah, you could still use the same clause because the findings align with your vote.
Seems kind of funny we're denying something they already agreed to.
Well, technically, they haven't withdrawn their application, so we have to rule on it.
So we
do that.
want to deny it, but we don't want to deny the findings of the staff report.
Well, the findings of the staff report are to deny, so you're,
Staff report.
You're right in line.
Okay. So how do you want us to word it if we want to deny it?
you would word it the same way. You would just say to deny instead of to approve according to the only time you wouldn't be
Okay.
able to use that is if you, like Andy earlier, changed a finding. So then he had to specify in his motion what he was changing and what was still, so that's the only time it gets more complicated.
All right. So I'd like to make a motion to deny variance 2 of the application number that we talked about earlier, according to the findings of the staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Roll call vote when you're ready.
Okay, so this is a yes to deny.
Yes.
Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hensensberger,
Yes.
Chester Pencas.
Yes.
Okay, which brings us to variance 3.
So you guys get together and hash it out, be all right. Cool. You guys are free to go, stay if you want.
Okay, so the third one is for roadside buffer yard. And it's for a participating landowner. Jeffrey Dunk is requesting the applicant make changes and completely eliminate the roadside buffer across all of his ground. And there's a little bit of it shown in the next drawing down under variance 4 because it's south of the house, and then the rest is shown north. He is leasing this land and receiving payments on it. There's been some issues where Invenergy put plantings in and he simply removed them on leased ground. These plantings are here to benefit the neighborhood and maintain a softer, uniform look from the road. They're not there to benefit the landowner who's receiving payments for the lease. No other participating landowner in this entire project is attempting to remove all the screening and landscaping while still accepting lease payments. Mr. Dunk has submitted a letter of support, but he's not the entity that the roadside landscaping protects. One thing I did talk about with Invenergy is if maybe it could be moved back closer to the fences, because this is an area where some of those panels have moved back, but there's still areas that are sort of close to the road that maybe it could be realigned. But I wasn't real clear at the end of this as to what Invenergy's stance was on that in terms of what other options that there were. So in terms of findings, make sure I'm on the correct variance here, 3. All right, so finding number 1, which is your approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. So this is a significant distance of buffer yard landscaping, and thus the elimination may have some effect unless it's mitigated with reposition landscaping, which is what we kind of discussed. Well, a letter of support was received. This isn't just, there'll be some other requests where farmers ask for landscaping just be repositioned a little bit so that they can get like 100-foot wide access to get their equipment in and out, and that's not the case here. We're just talking about plain not having it, and it's consistent from the north coming down to this field. And we've got additional issues where vegetative buffers on the leased ground that are required for the solar farm to comply are being forcibly removed that are kind of in play as well. So staff kind of felt unless an equivalent buffering mitigation could be recommended, maybe by Invenergy, there doesn't appear to be a finding met that we're still mitigating, what the ordinance requires for view from the road for consistency through the farm, and not creating a situation where in this one spot there's absolutely no landscaping of any kind. The second finding is that the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So this is kind of the same thing again. This is a significant length of landscaping. There's nowhere else in this entire solar farm where we're looking at taking out roadside buffer yards and not moving them back or, rearranging them in a way they still function for the view of those that live nearby and pass through the neighborhood. This is on leased ground. It's not on farm field. Even though it may look like field, it's leased, so payments are received. And then the third one, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So again, we've got that same thing that the parties that are benefited are the neighbors, and there's no other place in this entire area where the solar farm is leasing the ground for the landscaping but not installing it. So just as staff really struggled with the size of the area and being unsure that this finding was met either. Following that, as we went through, we felt like there wasn't a practical difficulty, on that third one. Arguing for 100% elimination of all buffering versus changing the type or positioning it. I could certainly see how perhaps placing it up against the road if he's hoping to take lease payments while also farming it and kind of double making some double income where he can. I could see how he might not like the placement of the landscaping, but it could be repositioned to a location that's a little bit different and still has its function. So it struggled with the complete elimination, and did recognize that maybe if a compromise could be reached, a partial variance might still be appropriate if it included a mitigation rather than just an elimination. But as presented, for fully eliminating it, staff recommended to deny the variance request because it doesn't meet the findings, and again, recommends that the applicant maybe look at reconfiguring this alignment to place it closer to panels, or to request just a partial variance to figure out how to serve both interests in this case, and noted that if we're just realigning the screening, that can be done with an amendment to the development plan. Now, if they're needing to do a partial elimination and a partial realignment, that would need a partial variance. But as of writing the staff report, I didn't have a clear counter proposal that everybody was in agreement with, that Invenergy was like, yep, this will definitely work. The landowner's in support of this. So that's why I didn't follow through with saying, here's exactly what staff thinks should happen, because I'm not sure I would be representing something that would actually work for everybody, and Invenergy may have or may not have anything to add to that, but that was where I landed on that with the staff report with that buffer yard.
Okay. Petitioner have anything to add there?
Not too much to add, only that we are, based on the feedback Liz brought, we're still looking at moving it back, but we don't have anything else other than we're still looking at it, so understand the staff's findings.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to add?
To say something. My name's Tony Slaughter, and I live on 300 North. You guys are probably real familiar with my name if you've talked to Luke at all. But we have watched this grow, and everything that has been put into place by Area Plan and the commissioners and Invenergy, everybody's tried to work together to accommodate this project. And I agree wholeheartedly with the keeping that in place, keeping that landscaping in place. We have watched it to the east, we've watched it to the north, we've watched it to the south. It's everywhere, and we can see dunks, and I would love to see the landscaping stay. We've lost so much wildlife, the birds, the bees, everything's gone. And we want it back, and the best way to get it back is to maintain all of the landscaping that we possibly can. So in all of these variances that you're looking for, if the person that is initially impacted by it wants it, then okay, live with it. The next homeowner will have to deal with it. But just in general, and I'll say this once, and I won't go through all the other variances, please give us nature back. We moved to the country 25 years ago to have peace and quiet and privacy, and landscaping gives us that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add?
Hi, my name's Jim King. I'm not really planning on speaking about this area, but I live in that area, and I know from his farm, they originally had the flags out along the road at the intersection. Well, I wasn't thrilled with that because I am a farmer, he's a farmer, and his fence line where the panels are back into the field. And I would rather see those trees and screenings back along that fence to not really interfere with the intersection, but to allow him the farm ground. But back along the fence line, I see no problem with that.
And a variance would not be required to simply
Yeah.
move it back. That
Yeah.
would just be a choice
Yes.
between landowner and.
I would just like to, that's where I would like to see it, rather than along the road like it was originally, had the flags out there. So if that would help. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Does anybody else have anything to add? Okay, go to board discussion.
I remember when this project came up, and one of the main things that people wanted was the buffer yard stuff. And I can see why people would want it around their house and perhaps alongside the road. I certainly would want to give the farmers adequate vision to see at intersections. it doesn't make sense to do things that interrupt safety. And I think that both Energy and others would agree with that too. So I think if I understand it right, this is probably just like the other one. We deny it, and there can be an adequate change in what needs to happen to benefit both the farmers and
I do.
the other people.
I would note that a denial, like the exact same request, they can't bring back for a period of time. But
Okay.
if they came to a compromise, let's say, like the ordinance requires the landscaping on the outside of the fences, but let's say one thing I said to them is maybe they could reach a compromise where they could put it inside the fences where it couldn't end up being destroyed. But that would still require a variance because you're reversing, even though you're not eliminating landscaping. So they could bring back a different request if they came to a compromise that didn't fully meet the ordinance but didn't remove all the landscaping either.
So how do we do that then? If you don't want to.
For today, you would just deny,
Okay,
unless you wanted to approve something else. We don't really have a counter plan on the table to be able to discuss.
correct. Okay, so the denial would be best, let them work it out. If they need to come back, they ask us. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I was just gonna ask Jay, I mean, if he keeps taking them out, I mean, is that like a legal issue?
It's it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
I-
the applicant's working through
Well,
that with their.
Because I mean,
yeah.
I don't want, I mean, to us have to hear it again, or for them to keep putting more time into it if he keeps taking them out, just to
It-
make it easier on everybody. I was just curious.
It's ultimately a legal issue that
Okay.
both we and Invenergy have to navigate through. But just because something is a difficult legal issue to me doesn't indicate that you should ignore the standards. Like,
no,
because
yep.
something's, because I wrestled with that too, like, is the easy thing to just, and I thought, no, if somebody who's following all the processes and being respectful, even though they don't like the outcome, can be respectful, and I wouldn't recommend it for them. Like,
Well, I-
why would I do it in the opposite situation?
And I don't
you
think
know?
it's fair for all the other participants that even if they do have a variance, they're following the rules.
No, and I know,
And-
I can speak personally, I know Kings aren't thrilled with all the landscaping, I know Ostlers aren't thrilled with all the landscaping, but they're accepting the compromise that, they may be asking for some little modifications, but they're accepting the compromise that accepting the lease payments, the buffer yard is part of that. So, I feel like once you start being like, it's not a practical difficulty, we're just gonna eliminate standards, like, where do you stop? Like, how do you decide who deserves to double dip and farm that area plus get a lease payment and who doesn't, like, it's a lease issue. The land's leased, it's part of the use, is kind of the way I came to view that pretty universally across all of these.
I just didn't know if there's anything else we could put in the motion for that, like on the legal side.
I don't think you need to.
Well,
But I didn't know if that's too separate.
that is the tenant who's has the right to control that
Okay.
has the
Problem.
they have the legal. They're the one who's been injured and would have the cause of action.
Okay. I was just curious.
So
So same
I
thing
think
as
with,
last.
I think to move things on here, we probably need to, make a motion to deny variance 3 of the application number that we talked about previously, according to the findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference.
Second.
Okay, that was Andy as a second, Chester as a motion.
Roll call vote when you get a chance, Liz.
Okay, again, this is a yes to deny. Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
Chester Benkus.
Yes.
Okay, so denied 5-0. So that brings us to request number 4. So request 4 is also on Jeffrey Dunk's property, and he was supportive of both of these, but this one's a little bit different. This is actually the required screening for his house. And instead of asking for a complete variance, what they would like to do is place a line of native shrubs, which are good for wildlife and that kind of thing, inside the fence, on the south side of the fence, but on the north side of the panels, and then eliminate the landscaping buffer that would hedge in, the edge of his barns and stuff there. This particular row of landscaping is to the benefit of Mr. Dunk, not to the benefit of other property owners who may be out and around. So as we worked through the findings, this one was a little bit different. Like others that are similar, this request affects only the house that's requesting to remove it. And in this case, there's an offer to add landscaping to the south, so we still have some screening there for his house, but also you still have some vegetation, remaining. And it's actually the native shrubs, which I think is better for wildlife than the evergreens are. The second finding in terms of use and value, again, this really only affects the house requesting removing it. And you've got some landscaping being added to compensate, so the finding seems to be met. And finally, in terms of practical difficulties, this particular screening, the owner of this home feels that the screening, if installed as planned, diminishes views, quality of life, and maneuverability for that farm property, because he does own both the field and the house. And there's a couple of these that are like this, and I can certainly see how when you look at this, you're pulling your equipment in and out to get into your field. This would be difficult to maneuver around and could become obstructive, in terms of normal farm operations. So thus, this finding appeared to be met as well. Consequently, staff recommends to approve this variance request to remove the screening as shown, with the condition that a line of shrubs be placed inside the solar array fence as shown on the submitted site plan.
Anybody need to add to that one? Okay. Any board discussion? Sounds like a slam dunk to me.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion to approve application for variance 4 of the same number we're talking about, to approve the variance requested to remove the screenings shown with the condition mentioned in staff report.
I'll second.
Okay.
Okay, so that was,
Grant seconded. And Chester made the motion.
Roll call vote when you're ready, Liz.
all right, Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pittigo,
Yes.
Scott Husensberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
Okay, which brings us to 5, halfway. So, variance number 5, we're gonna move over to the King property, and this is another residential screening variance request. So this is another participating landowner who has submitted a letter of support that was included in what I sent on to you. This particular house and farmstead is dead center in the middle of arrays on all 4 sides, in the middle of the King property, not adjacent to any road. And the screening, of course, was filling in all the gaps where you could see between the barns, that you would see panels. And Mr. King feels that this screening is in his way for being able to move equipment and operate normally. You can't even really see this from the road because of the number of panels. So real similarly in terms of findings to the last one. This screening request affects only this house. The applicant doesn't feel it affects him negatively, so the first finding seems met. And the second finding, again, it affects only this house. The applicant doesn't feel it's affecting his use or value in an adverse manner. And finally, strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance resulting in practical difficulties, much like the last one. The applicant, the owner, has expressed to the applicant that this screening as planned would diminish views that they actually prefer, and quality of life, and then most importantly, maneuverability of equipment in and around these barns, since he owns both the field and the house. And so that finding appears to be met as well. Consequently, staff recommends to approve the variance request and eliminate the screening around the King house. In this case, there wasn't any recommendation for additional screening because this is out in the middle of the field. Mr. Dunk's house was a little different because when you drive by on the road, that's serving kind of a double purpose, but not so much in this case, so.
Does anybody have anything to add on this?
Do I need to speak on that?
We're okay, Jim.
I'll just say, the screening itself was just bits and pieces around the area, and I've got enough trees and buildings around there. And I don't mind seeing the panels. I think they're rather interesting. And even in the morning, they're no taller than a field of corn. But by noon, they're flat. I can see out. Evening, same way, they're like a field of corn out there. So it doesn't bother me a bit. I don't feel I need a screening. Plus, I've already sprayed and planted the area around that. So, and I've got my sweet corn planted in there, and you don't mess with the sweet corn. Okay, and thank you.
Thanks, Jim. See if I have anything else to add to that. Okay. Staff or board discussion.
I'm ready to move.
I'm ready to move to you.
I'll make a motion to approve application number, whatever this is.
5.
Variance 5. According to the findings of staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference.
I'll second.
You ready for a roll call vote?
Roll call vote.
Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hutzmansberger,
Yes.
Chester Backus.
Yes.
Okay, so that brings us to variance 6. And I've somehow gotten off on my notes. Okay, so variance request number 6 is also on Mr. King's property, but this involves screening at the end of his drive to the south side of the arrays and a request that it be eliminated because he finds it to be in the way for moving farm equipment in and out. This one is gonna sound a little bit similar to kind of one of the previous ones he talked about. This screening is not here for Mr. King's benefit, but rather to protect the house adjacent to the south, which is Mr. Davis. So Mr. King did provide a letter of support, but Mr. Davis has not communicated with our office in any way, though he certainly received notice and has not, I know Invenergy has reached out to try to see if they can get support. But staff has to conclude that he does not support the variance since he has not been willing to submit or call and state that he does. The landscaping on the east side of the drive, that actually, on the site plan, Invenergy has suggested just drawing it up closer to the fence panels. So that doesn't actually require a variance. That can be done on the development plan because the landscaping's still there, the screening's still there, it's just repositioning. But on the west side of the driveway, that's where the screening would require a variance to be removed. And what I kind of communicated to Invenergy is that, I can respect the difficulty of maneuvering, and it would have been nice if the applicant had foreseen that, that he needed to have the panels be spaced further, that I suggested they need to find, if the house across the street is not in support, they really need to find a different way, even if it means more screening, to run screening up the fence line, from north to south, so that that house doesn't then get a substantially larger view of the panels when that's eliminated. And this is another one where there's not a proposal for an in-between that gives me a real clear partial variance. So unless one of the people in the audience happens to be Mr. Davis and the BZA can figure out something that's a partial variance that provides screening still, I can't suggest the solution, but that was what informed then how I worked through the findings on this. So finding number 1, staff basically struggled with the fact that with no support from the affected neighbor and a substantial increase of views, if there's no screening at all in that area, I can't really argue that the findings met, and the same thing for item number 2. And then item 3, this one I spent a little bit more time on because the participating landowner, Mr. King, would certainly state that this screening creates a practical difficulty for him being able to get his equipment in and out. And if he was the only one that it affected, I would actually agree with him because being able to get your equipment in and out is important. But the problem here is this screening is specifically to mitigate and protect the non-participating property owner who may not have wanted this development here in the first place, but the decisions of the whole as a community took things a different direction. And this is the mitigation so that he has, a different view to look at. So staff I felt like if you remove the screening on the left side of the drive without offering any alternative screening solution, and I suggested maybe a single row of something that screens up the fence line combined with a privacy fence, something else that might work, or maybe seeing if Mr. Davis would allow some landscaping on his land, that give him screening, looking at alternatives, but without some kind of equivalent or better screening, a full elimination would appear to create a hardship for the neighbors across the road, so they don't have a practical difficulty on their side like the Hickmans did, on their variance. So thus, I kind of was forced to come down to a recommendation to deny unless in the course of conversation, some kind of equivalent screening can be proposed along the north-south fence line or inside of the fence line to mitigate the effect of removing the trees that are roadside, so the neighboring house does not have an increased view of panels by reorienting that. But in terms of fully removing it, I would recommend to deny that.
Thanks, Liz. Would the petitioner have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add that Invenergy is fully intent on working with Mr. Davis to meet his needs. I know, Liz, in your report, you mentioned a conditional approval. Just wondering maybe how that works about if conditionally approve if Mr. Davis gets the screening.
It wouldn't be that way, but that would be, let's just say, for example, that you went, okay, we've got room, we can put full screening, but, Mr. King needs to be able to, he needs the full width to be able to drive down, so maybe we can put it on the inside of the, the fence between the arrays, because there's no requirement to screen a deer fence from a neighbor, it's the panels you have to be between. But since the ordinance technically says the landscaping goes on the outside, you'd need a partial kind of conditional variance to let you reverse them. So, or if you went to a complete privacy fence, that also, is not landscaping, so you get into kind of a partial variance. But I think there'd have to be in staff's feeling, the board can do whatever they like, certainly, I don't have a vote, but my feeling as staff is, given, you guys have been great partners, overall in trying to work through complicated situations, but there's also other interests, people who are negatively affected and who have, suffered a great deal through the construction process, of it not being a pleasant place to live or enjoy. So for me as staff to be able to argue a support for some kind of other compromise, I find very difficult to responsibly represent both sides of that without knowing what that compromise is, because what if it's brokered later on, the board doesn't get an opportunity to view it, but Mr. Davis feels it still doesn't offer him screening, and there's a point where the board has to decide, between two sides, but if we don't have a proposal to consider, I just struggle with that. I try really hard not to forget either side of something when I try to look at it. So that's just, it's nothing against your request. I understand where you're coming from. That's just where I stood.
No, and can you help me understand as part of the process, if we did end up putting screening on Mr. Davis's side of the road, if that's something he agreed to, I think it would still require a variance?
It would, because technically it's supposed to be, their wrapping. So that would be, again, a compromise where, if Mr. Davis went, okay, I want the landscape, I don't want to see it, I don't mind, I mean, but yes, you would still need that variance because technically you're making a change to what the normal is that's beyond what we can administratively agree to, where you're just realigning. Now, if you simply took plantings and turned them 90 degrees and ran them on the outside of the fence on the King property up the length until Mr. Davis no longer had a line of sight, that would not require a variance because now you're still on the outside of the fence and the panels, between the panels and Mr. Davis's home. So there are some solutions that wouldn't, but.
So I think Invenergy would ask if there was going to be a partial or a conditional approval, would be for that solution of if screening is placed on the other side of the road. I understand if you'd ask that we come back for a second variance proposal for that, but I think that would be if a conditional is being thought about, it would be that if Mr. Davis is happy with screening on his side of his property, then maybe the screenage can be removed. Thank you.
So question I guess I've got is, so I pulled it up on Google because I wanted to zoom out. Is Davis's property, his house and residence sit to the east of the drive, is that correct?
His driveway is to the east, his house is kind of, I don't even know if I'd call it fully east. When you sit out there, it's kind of south right there.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time you angle the landscaping on the west side of the drive up, he's going to have a wide open view, like if you remove the landscaping on the other side. I stood there in the road and tried to walk back and forth. This was one of two sites, actually, Mr. Dunk's property and this site. I actually physically took the truck out and stopped and walked around on because I wanted to try to be fair, and I thought, well, maybe these things are further apart than I'm imagining, but I definitely had clear views, that was a challenge there. And I don't know if Mr. Davis is here. I know we have some other people who haven't spoken.
Yeah, he's
Yeah, so I don't want to keep saying, like, I don't know if we have somebody who might be able to inform you as to their viewpoint.
And I'd just like to say, you were actually out, you saw the screening was still there, but it was just widened out. Correct?
Yeah, so this proposal is actually looking at removing that screening all the way back to your fence line. So this
Well,
would,
the north-south fence, where it is now, you saw where it was now.
yeah, so when I looked at the fence line, I saw they had that in part way, but
Yeah.
you can see from Mr. Davis's house, those
Yeah.
panels there on the eastern side of
Yeah.
the stuff on the west side of the
Yeah.
drive.
And
And I don't see any tree right now that's gonna grow up to provide him that screening unless
I
this
mean-
is put in.
because when they originally put the flags in, I talked to Luke Williams, and I met with him and the landscape contractor down there. And we both agreed, all three of us agreed, that, to move them back from the road and widen it out a little bit would benefit to what I needed to get my equipment in, because it's still a working
Visibility.
farm. Yeah, visibility, and it's still a working farm. And my biggest problem is I've got a 70-foot grain auger I take in now there. I can't take that up my drive and turn down the road. I have to be over in the field area to come out and get out on the road with that. So that was my big thing with them. And another thing right now is that area was wide enough for me to farm. And so it has been sprayed and planted already. So I don't know if trees would even grow there right now. And I know grass won't grow there.
We're holding a bond for the landscaping for Invenergy, so until it's all in.
Okay.
Like there's some other areas where there's just some little issues that they have some time in which to finish all their planting. So if an alternative agreement is reached that involves rearranging or reorienting some stuff,
Yeah.
like, it's not like we're gonna be tagging Invenergy tomorrow, like, why plant them and let them die? No, we're gonna say,
Yeah.
okay, let's get a
Okay.
timeline and get it taken care of.
It's just when I did that, when they moved them back, I was under the impression, said, yeah, good enough, we're done with it. I didn't know if they were gonna wanna come back, and so it was a wide enough area for me to plant, and I planted it.
Yeah.
So-
Which unfortunately, I mean, if we were in a climate like in Florida where your crops were in year round, they'd be screening. But here, like
Yeah.
corn is, soybeans aren't, and it's only
Yeah.
part of the year, so it doesn't. Even though we know it will help in some areas, like we
Yeah.
can't count it. So
Yeah, because that was just my biggest concern, is getting an auger in and out of there, and then the visibility, and they took care of the visibility by moving back closer to the fence, which where the trees are now, right now in the screening, I'm satisfied with that. They moved them back far enough, then they moved them back out along the road down farther, so that suited me just fine.
yeah, the stuff that was just reoriented, that
Yeah.
doesn't need a variance. It's
Yeah.
just the elimination of this
Yeah.
section that's
Because
the,
it's pretty much where they are
Where
now.
this
I'm
requires.
well satisfied with they put them in, and I don't know how much you agree with or not. You've seen it, or
well, I think instead of talking to each other, like,
yeah,
you're
I
good.
know. Well,
He
he's
needs to talk to the board, and then the board
Yeah.
can decide
Yeah.
what they want to ask of each of you.
yeah.
And
Okay.
So I don't know if you have any questions for me or anything. Okay.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Davis, would you like to speak, please?
I do live right across from Mr. King's property. I'll be honest with you, I was very upset when the solar panel people come in. Me and Mr. Moeller have been in contact. I think there is something that we can come to a compromise on. We have been back and forth, and I'm okay with them planting trees on my property. We've already discussed a couple different trees, so that, if that has to be a variance, I'm okay with that. We've been shooting emails back and forth. I didn't send him an email over the weekend, but I did send him one today. So I think that we can work something out to where the King property, Invenergy, and I can all be happy with what we've got going on. I would like to have more screening, and that's what we're discussing right now. So as it stands right now, I would like to see more screening up the driveway of Mr. King. Now, him getting his equipment in and out, I grew up as a farm kid, I know. If they can plant it next to the fence row, I'm happy with that. Like I told Mr. Mueller, I don't want to see it. Now, I know there has to be compromise, and that's what we're trying to come to terms with, to figure out what we can do to compromise this.
You know, there's another option here too, if we don't want to like do a conditional, because it seems like this is really, like, I don't say ill-formed, it sounds like it's going there, but I don't want to like take away anybody's, you know, place in that negotiation. You could choose to continue just this one, then it doesn't have to be re-advertised. You know, nobody has to send new letters, and they would have another 30 days to try to come to an agreement, and then it could come back to you next month to be reevaluated and see if they've arrived at something that mitigates, you know, and meets the spirit of the ordinance, but addresses the practical difficulty Mr. King's fighting with, and then you don't have to figure out who gets what. You can give them a chance to try to figure that out.
You guys don't have to advertise, we're just continuing it. You guys have 30 days to figure out what we need to do. I think that's,
I would say I'd let Mr. Davis and them keep emailing, since they're kind of just starting that.
Right.
Just to be fair.
okay,
I'd say do that.
you guys all agree with that? Cool.
The next meeting is June 25th, just to make sure that's clearly announced for,
Okay.
So we
Good deal.
needed a motion to continue.
Yeah.
yep.
All right, I'll be glad to make a motion to continue variance number 6 on application number whatever this is.
6.
According to the findings of this. Yeah, we
don't
said
have to do
variance
that,
6.
just-
Yeah,
we just
yeah,
need
you did.
Okay,
Second.
okay. According to the findings of staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference.
Actually,
No,
you
you
don't
don't
need
have to
any
do that.
Oh, I
findings.
don't.
You're just-
Okay.
you're just
Oh,
gonna
wait a
continue.
minute.
Yeah, I know, there's a lot of
Continue.
these. We're continuing, we're not ruling.
Okay,
But good job not missing Jay's language.
I'll put another line there.
Okay, so this is a motion simply to continue to the next board meeting to give them a chance to figure this out. So a yes is to continue. Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Mueller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hepsensberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
Okay, so that's continued, 5-0. So I guess the only thing, you know, I would ask as staff, but kind of for all you too, is please try to come to some kind of agreement so we can figure it out. So, or at least know what your two sides are, so everybody can make a decision between whatever the stances are. Okay, so that brings us to variance 7. So variance 7 is the only variance of the group that is not motivated by a landowner request of some sort. This is a request by the applicants themselves, although the landowner is supportive of it and has submitted a letter stating that they have no objection to the variance being granted. So when the panels were being installed, there was an error made, and instead of being at the 200 foot from the house at 356 West 300 North, it ended up being at 196. In fact, when we measured this, it was too close to call, so I asked them to have a surveyor go out and double check this one, and the surveyor did confirm that it was too close. So since construction is already completed and it was found, it's one of those things, our job is to double check everything. So when everything was installed, we actually went out and physically checked all the setbacks to houses and the setbacks to roads, in different places to make sure. And really, given the scope of this being the only one that got too close to a house, we do regularly see in construction where nobody's being nefarious, just whoever dug the hole didn't measure with the same tape measure everybody else used, whatever happened, and then you have to figure it out from there. So the applicant, Hardy Hills, would like to request a variance instead of moving a block of installed panels over 4 foot. The affected house is a participating landowner, and these panels that are infringing on his house are on land that he is leasing to the applicant and receiving payments for. And at the time of writing the staff report, I forgot to subtract this sentence. I hadn't yet heard from Mr. Jones, but he since did submit a letter, and it was included in what was sent to you guys. So just make sure I correct that. So in terms of findings, that the approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. So the house that's being impinged on is owned by a participating landowner. He has submitted a letter of support that he doesn't feel that this is going to negatively affect his home. The second finding that the use and value of the adjacent area is not affected in a substantially adverse manner. So again, we've got a letter of support from the landowner who's being impinged upon. He's the only one affected in this particular situation. He does have full screening installed, so that, there's no change there. It's just the 4 feet. And finally, that the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. So, this was something I had to learn early on when we were going back and forth with site planning with the solar farm. You can't just move a panel. It seems logical that you would just pick up a panel and move it out of the way or move it a little further from something, but these things are actually in units, like they call them a block. So in order to move this the 4 foot over, you can't just move a single row. You'd have to remove the entire section, including fences and landscaping, which in terms of just the financial impact is the error of the applicant and really not part of my logic, because they could have double checked it earlier on. But the construction process has been pretty brutal for the neighborhood at this point. Landscaping is starting to take effect. We're starting to get ground cover, starting to remove silt fences. Things are, roads are going to start being paved here in the next few weeks. We're starting to see quality of life improve in the area. So another construction process would involve this entire field being picked up to move it over 4 feet, which would disturb the neighborhood all over again. It would cause increased flooding all over again. And since the panels foreclose to the house, the landowner feels doesn't create any issue. It would appear this finding would be met just based on the fact that this would create another round of disturbance and noise and driving piles and all the things that have been hard for non-participating neighbors to live with, and it doesn't affect any non-participating neighbor. So consequently, staff recommends to approve the variance request to allow the panels to remain at 196 foot from the house at 356 East, 300 North.
Does anybody have anything to speak on this before we go to board discussion?
So if the homeowner's not upset, then I don't.
Okay,
Variance 7.
I'm ready to go, yeah.
go for it.
You're just a motion-making machine.
Some are pretty easy. I'll make a motion to approve application for variance 7 of the application number that we're presently talking about, according to the findings of staff report. Words are incorporated in the motion by reference.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Roll call vote when you get a chance, Liz.
Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Mueller,
Yes.
Stacy Pedigo,
Yes.
Scott Husmansberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
All right, so that brings us to 8. So this is actually a request from a non-participating landowner, Mrs. Hernandez, and she is actually asking for the applicant, Hardy Hills, to eliminate the screening completely around their residence. This is a little bit of a funny residence. I don't so much go into it in the staff report, but originally there were going to be panels on all 3 sides of this residence, and when the efficiency of the panels increased and thus the footprint of the panels decreased because of the megawatt cap, this was an area where Invenergy actually reduced panels. There's a ditch to the south, which can be seen, I think, in the roadside buffer yard variance 9 picture. That ditch has trees. The reason we didn't authorize them to eliminate the screening is because they're mostly deciduous trees. So while there's probably 100% screening during 3 seasons of the year, in the winter, they're probably going to see the panels some. But this particular landowner feels that they don't like having this interrupting their views. They want to be able to see, what's around them. Since this screening is solely for the benefit of this house, and the panels are not immediately adjacent, this was just a gray area where staff was uncomfortable saying that it was no longer needed. And they didn't move it, in up against the panels. So as I went through the findings, finding number 1, much like the other 2 we heard previously, the screening removal request affects only the house requesting removing it. The finding appears to be met. Finding number 2, similarly, this only affects this house. This is another area like King where this particular screening really has no additional benefit for traffic driving by because there are no immediately adjacent panels on either side of this house. They're all on the other side of the ditch or way north. The laydown yard is up against this and it's coming out. So then finally, in terms of practical difficulty, the owner of this home feels that the screening, if it's installed as plans, diminishes their views and their quality of life and the maneuverability on and around her property. So the finding would appear to be met. Consequently, staff recommends approving the variance request and eliminating the screening around the Banderas Hernandez house.
Very well. Is there anybody that wants to speak on this one? Okay. Board discussion.
Does the variance run with it, run with the property?
Yeah, yes, once the variance is granted, then if it's sold in the future, somebody, I mean, it'd be like anything else you buy, you're gonna go out and you're gonna look at it, and you're gonna see what your views are, and if you're okay with them, you're gonna buy it, and if you're not okay with them, you're not gonna buy
I
it, but
guess that
if
problem is on the
the buyer,
person that owns it now.
Yeah.
really.
you know, yes, because they're gonna have to sell it.
And they're the one asking for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, 30 years from now, if a future owner came in and was like, why wasn't screening placed here, then the answer is gonna be, well, because the owner at the time didn't have adjacent panels, didn't like the screening, requested a variance, and it was granted. So you shouldn't have bought it if you didn't like the view,
I understand.
Let's make a motion.
Yeah. You ready?
Chester, go for
We
it,
ready?
buddy.
All right. I'll make a motion to approve application for variance number 8, the same number we're talking about, according to the findings of staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference.
Second.
Then moved and seconded. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Sorry, I'm just making sure it's as clear as mud over here. Okay, I'm sorry, Chester, I assume that was your motion.
It was.
Grant, were you the second?
Scott was.
Scott, oh,
Jumped in there, wouldn't make
the one
everybody
time I
know.
didn't look up. All right,
We're gonna rock it up a little bit.
perfect.
Stacy's got the next one.
Make sure I pay attention. All right, Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Moeller,
Yeah, or yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hudsonsberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
All right, so that's approved 5-0. All right, so that brings us to number 9. So this again, it's just south of the same house we were just discussing, and this is also being requested by, the same landowner. However, it is on John Geis, the participating landowner's land. He is also supportive of it. So both parties have submitted a letter of support, although in this case, I don't know if Invenergy can speak to it, but staff is unsure of what, Mrs. Hernandez's reasoning, is. In terms of Mr. Geis, the property owner, he needs to be able to still access fields on both sides, and the way that this is oriented and placed, I mean, I'll tell you, in a pickup truck, you can barely squeak between it, which is great from a screening perspective, but obviously a problem if you're driving even an average-sized tractor by today's standards. So,
Or my mother-in-law.
or possibly.
Trust me.
So, at any rate, the thing that I kind of looked at here is, again, this buffer yard is not designed to benefit the owners, either of them specifically, but this particular buffer yard is to benefit the neighborhood in general as they drive by. Now, I would note again, you've got this ditch here. You do have existing landscaping, that's part of this, that's in here in play. And you do have some issues with access. So as we worked through this, first off, in terms of whether or not this is injurious to public health, safety, morals, or general welfare. So this landscaping's along the road. In the terms of what's north of the ditch, there's no panels directly behind it, and the ditch is between the road and the panels in all locations. On the south side of the road, there are some panels, but the views are limited because of existing vegetation. So the finding would appear to be met. The second one is the use and value of the area adjacent to the property. So again, there's no panels, this north side of the ditch, the panels were 100% removed, so this is one of those gray areas that staff kind of erred to the side of caution on outside of a public hearing. But there's very limited views of panels because of that existing vegetation. So again, the finding appears to be met. In the final one, this is where it becomes kind of a dual thing. In terms of practical difficulty, the farmer definitely has a practical difficulty in that there's no panels here, so it is going to be used as field. He can't enter it to plant, harvest, or care for it. So that finding is met. What staff kind of wrestled with, and it's kind of indicated in the plan, is staff struggled with 100% removing this versus doing some clustering and keeping some of those plantings and kind of placing them to the sides so equipment can get through. So where we landed was staff recommended to approve the variance with the condition that half of the removed plantings need to be clustered to the north and south of the field access on the south side of the ditch, with space for equipment to pass between them. And the site plan kind of shows those cluster points. I talked to Invenergy about this. The north side of the ditch, there's really no panels there to buffer at all. You've got that whole ditch in between. So that's why we focused on the south side in terms of wrestling with that. But there does seem to be a way to compromise on both. So that was where I landed.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that? Does anybody, talk to John about this, and is he okay?
Yeah, so we reached this compromise because his key point was about getting farm access. So that's why we think this cluster approach will still kind of, like Liz pointed to, it's a compromise that gives access and still provides some.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion about it?
If they've reached a compromise, I think, as long as he can get his equipment in and out.
Yep.
I'm ready.
Go ahead, Chester.
All right. I'll make an motion to approve application for variance number 9 of the same number that we're talking about, according to the findings of staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference with the conditions referenced.
Second. Good job. All right, Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Moeller,
Yes.
Stacy Pittico,
Yes.
Scott Husmansberger,
Yes.
and Chester Bankus.
Yes.
All right, and last but not least, this is also on John Geis's land, but this is south of the Armstrong house, so it's further south along this road from where Ms. Hernandez's house is. So this is again, the participating landowner is supporting this and requesting eliminating the buffer yard in about a 250-foot long area to allow access to the field behind for equipment. Again, this is where we kind of discussed, and we're looking at keeping all the plantings, but rearranging them to the sides to allow for access instead of completely eliminating them. I did, because I wondered, I did actually go and pull this whole field up in the development plan, because I thought, why does he need two different places to access the same field? There is no way to drive between these two ends. The solar panels like 100% block the middle. So I wanted the board to know, I did look to see if there was really a practical difficulty here, if it was just somebody who didn't want to have to drive a circle. But I couldn't get a piece of equipment in both ends that I could figure around the landscaping. So anyways, we go through the findings on this. In terms of being injurious to the public, since we're proposing moving the plantings to the north and the south to create an access, the finding appears to be met. You still got the plantings. The second one about the use and value of the area. Again, we're maintaining all of the required plantings, but we're just moving them over to the north and the south to create a wider area for access. And finally, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will create a practical difficulty. So in this case, as long as the opening is just wide enough for the farm equipment and not, the whole thing, we still have the plantings there. It's certainly a practical difficulty that you need to be able to get in and out to plant and maintain, or we're just gonna have fields of weeds. So consequently, that finding appears to be met. And as we work through the recommendations, staff recommended to approve the variance request with the condition the plantings remain, but are relocated and clustered to the north and the south of the entry area, as roughly as suggested in the site plan.
Any discussion here? Okay, board discussion?
I'm ready. All right, I'll make a motion to approve application for variance number 10 of the number that we're talking about, according to the findings of the staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference with the conditions referenced.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded, roll call when you're ready.
That was Grant again.
Yes, it was.
Andy Bailey,
Yes.
Grant Moeller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Husmansberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
All right. So it's probably gonna be a week or so, but Kat will get minutes on this put together, and then we'll make sure, not only will we send that, we'll make sure that, that if Energy gets a copy, and if anybody else wants a copy, they'll be able to request it. They won't be technically fully official till the board signs them in June, but if you're trying to figure out or remember what got approved and what got denied, they should have that record in there, so.
You want my notes?
Kat probably wouldn't complain. You good?
I wouldn't complain.
Okay. Do you have any new business?
No, we don't, and
Good.
greatly appreciate you guys' patience and trying to work through that. It was tough to organize.
And I think you took the right approach of doing them one at a time.
By 5, I was thankful too, because I'd have been lost as well.
The next meeting, be June 25th, 2024, same place.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second, go adjourn.
And I'd like to compliment you for the staff reports and all the